the small, isolated town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, there was a man whose name would become synonymous with the darkest corners of the human psyche. Ed Gein. The 1940s and 1950s were years of struggle and rebuilding in post-war America, but for the residents of Plainfield, their world was about to be shaken by the most unspeakable horrors. For years, a killer stalked the town, a quiet, unassuming man whose horrific acts would only come to light after the unthinkable was discovered. In this story, we'll explore the disturbing real-life events that took place in the 1940s and 1950s, when Ed Gein was suspected of being the killer on the loose, a man who seemed to hide in plain sight while carrying out his gruesome crimes. The early years, the seed of madness, born on August 27th, 1906, in La Crosse County, Wisconsin. Ed Gein's life was anything but ordinary. Raised on a farm in Plainfield by his strict, domineering mother, Augusta, Ed was taught that women were evil, immoral creatures who were the source of all sin. His father, George, was an alcoholic who could barely take care of himself, let alone provide for his family. Ed and his older brother, Henry, were left to do most of the work around the farm, under the stern watch of their mother. From a young age, Ed's existence was isolated. He had few friends, and his relationship with his mother was overpowering and unhealthy. Augusta kept Ed under her control, keeping him away from any outside influences. The world outside of their farmhouse was evil and sinful in her eyes, but to Ed, his mother was both his protector and his prisoner. When Ed's father passed away in 1940, leaving the family financially strapped, Ed and his brother Henry became responsible for the farm. But as the years passed, something began to shift. Henry mysteriously died in 1944 under suspicious circumstances. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but some locals speculated that Ed may have had something to do with his brother's untimely death. With Henry gone, Ed was left alone with his mother, and the isolation became even more profound. But when Augusta died in 1945, it was as if a part of Ed died with her. His grip on reality started to loosen, and the darkest parts of his mind began to awaken. For years, Ed had been obsessed with his mother and her rigid beliefs. Now, with her gone, he was left to his own devices. And it was during this time that Ed Gein's twisted desires began to take shape. The grave robber. The descent into horror. After his mother's death, Ed was left to roam the empty farmhouse, consumed by grief and loneliness. But it wasn't long before his fixation on his mother turned into something far more sinister. Ed began visiting the local cemeteries at night, digging up the bodies of recently buried women. He sought out women who resembled his late mother, women who could help him recreate the mother he had lost. Ed's actions went far beyond grave robbing. He didn't simply dig up the bodies, he dissected them, removing parts of their skin, bones, and organs. He took their remains back to his home, where he would perform grotesque experiments. He believed that by doing so, he could bring his mother back to life, or at the very least, he could become her. What started as a strange obsession quickly turned into an addiction, and as the years went on, Ed Gein's macabre collection of human remains grew. He fashioned lampshades from human skin, created chairs upholstered with human flesh, and even made a woman's suit, a grotesque costume made from the skin of his victims, which he would wear in a horrifying attempt to transform into his deceased mother. But Ed's crimes didn't stop at grave robbings. In 1954, something darker emerged. He began to murder. The first known victim was Mary Hogan, a local tavern owner who had gone missing. Her disappearance wasn't immediately linked to Ed, but as time passed, it became clear that she was just the beginning. In 1957, another woman, Bernice Worden, was reported missing. Bernice, the owner of a local hardware store, was last seen leaving her shop on November 16th. Her disappearance sparked a wave of fear in Plainfield. The police quickly linked her vanishing to Ed Gein, and when they went to his farm to question him, they made the most horrifying discovery. Inside the house, the police discovered human remains scattered throughout the rooms, body parts turned into macabre works of art. Bernice Worden's body was found in a shed, decapitated and mutilated. Her heart had been removed and was nowhere to be found, but the horrors didn't end there. They uncovered skulls used as bowls, human skin fashioned into clothing, and a shrunken head that Ed had displayed in his home. The crime scene was a nightmare beyond imagination, a place where death had been turned into a grotesque form of art. The arrest and trial, unmasking the monster. Ed Gein was arrested on November 16, 1957, for the murder of Bernice Worden. During his interrogation, he confessed to killing the Mary Hogan as well. He was charged with 2 murders, but the true extent of his actions was still unclear. At his trial in 1958, it was determined that Ed was insane. He was not fit to stand trial. He was sent to Central State Hospital for the criminally insane in Waupun, Wisconsin, where he would spend the rest of his life. Ed Gein never saw the inside of a courtroom for a true trial. His actions, as monstrous as they were shaped by a mind that had long been fractured by years of isolation and twisted obsession. He died in 1984, a man who had inspired countless horror stories, but whose true crime was far more horrifying than any fictional tale. The legacy of Ed Gein, the real-life horror. Though Ed Gein is gone, his legacy lives on. His twisted acts of violence and desecration would inspire some of the most famous horror films and characters in history. Norman Bates, the infamous motel owner in Psycho, Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and even Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs, all owe their existence to the real-life horrors that Ed Gein inflicted on Plainfield. Ed Gein's story reminds us of the darkest corners of the human mind, where obsession and madness intertwine to create unspeakable horrors. His farmhouse in Plainfield, Wisconsin, has long since been demolished, but the fear he instilled in that quiet town lives on in the collective memory of those who still remember the nightmare that took place there. The horror of Ed Gein. Thank you for joining me as we explored the chilling, true story of Ed Gein. His actions continue to haunt us, reminding us that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who walk among us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more terrifying true crime stories. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying horrors are rooted in real life.